And so, how do we support Windows 11 on Nutanix? So these are just the minimums here. So our hypervisor has a minimum version, our AOS, which is our base platform, our Prism Central, which is our management, and then we have our drivers that go into the OS, our VirtIO, and then making sure that as when you're rolling those VMs out, whether it's through a manual build with the ISO or through automation like MDT or Packer, or pick the tools you use to automate your deployment of virtual machines, making sure that you have UEFI secure boot and VTPM enabled. But I do want to reiterate, these are the minimums, and there are some other newer versions you might want to do, depending on what kind of features and functionality you need, but also too just keeping the platform up to date, again, because we're all software, and the beauty of software is that we can add new features and functionality to improve performance and add more security features without having to change the hardware out. So that's the beauty of virtualization. So for example, we just released our AHV 10, which with every AHV release, we add things to help get better improvement, better performance, security on the same hardware, because again, we do everything inside of software.
Yeah. To Jarian's point, I mean, Windows 11 has actually been out for a lot longer than I think most people realize. So, in that time, other areas of the environment, other like software vendors and management tools have changed and updated as well. So certainly make sure that you meet these minimums, but plan for some of those other integrations that you have in your environment, whether it's graphical workloads, your backup and recovery environment, to make sure that, certainly this gets you a booting a Windows 11 machine, but all those management tools and resiliency that you have in your environment, make sure that all of those meet the necessary requirements as well.
And as we talked about, those were the bare minimums to run Windows 11 on Nutanix. But there are some considerations too as well for Windows 11. So enabling vTPM. So there are two ways that you can enable vTPM for a virtual machine. Actually, there's three ways because we have APIs as well. But from administrative standpoint, our Prism Central, which is our main multi-cluster administration piece, that's going to be in the UI when you're creating the VM. If you're still not using Prism Central as a customer and you're just using our Prism element, you are not going to see the option in the UI, but you can use our ACLI interface to go ahead and turn that on at the command line, but we also have APIs as well. But if you are a Nutanix customer and you are using end user computing on our platform, all the vendors we're pushing towards Prism Central integration, where traditionally today the ones that we support now have all been Prism Elements, and we'll talk about some of that a little bit later as well. As far as protecting, so the previous slide showed that you have to use, the minimums to run Windows 11 and support vTPM. But to protect them, we actually recommend using our Nutanix disaster recovery. So if you're still using protection domains as a customer, you may also want to look at our Nutanix disaster recovery. And again, that's also part of Prism Central. These are the minimums for that. That allows you to be able to replicate those to across clusters, whether you're on production and disaster recovery, or have this like a multi-location environment where you manage things centrally and push things out to those remote sites through there. We do fully support the virtualization-based security, which allows you to use Credential Guard and the Windows subsystem for Linux. Um, Also, to note that the subsystem for Linux VMs, they can't be live migrated, and that's more of a developer, high-end IT user in use case for that. And then GPUs as well. Now, this is not a Nutanix limitation. This is an NVIDIA one. So currently, NVIDIA does not support VBS, which that's going to impact the use of Credential Guard in the Windows subsystem for Linux. So right now, you kind of got to look at those use cases and say, do I need these features or do I need GPUs? So there's things to note out there, and that's something that we will support once NVIDIA supports that.
Yeah, and so now you can, at the beginning I said it's not just the Windows 11 part, it's all the other pieces that go into it. So now you can start to see like here are some of the use cases. I mean, VDI for developers has been something that just continues to grow because developers are all over the place and they're working for organizations across the globe as well. So, getting Windows 11 is one thing, but now we have to figure out how our users actually going to use this and what is it that we need to do to make sure that we can give them that full environment that allows them to do their work and allows us as the IT professionals to manage it and keep everything safe and running and resilient for the users.
And so this is what it looks like in the UI. So when you go through the Prism Central UI VM creation, you'll see options. It's the second after you click on like and you select like the VM name and the like the compute resources for like vCPU and RAM and so forth. You click next, and the second screen at the bottom, you'll see the boot configuration piece, and that's where you're going to have the UEFI BIOS mode or the legacy. And again, for Windows 11, you have to select that UEFI BIOS mode, and then you'll have the options enabled to enable secure boot and attach a vTPM. And then optionally, if you want to use credential guard, you can enable that there as well. But this is what it looks like from a UI perspective to as you're going through Prism Central. And then, kind of goes back to the conversation. Okay, so we know all this stuff we need. Nutanix supports everything we need for Windows 11. What's the conversation look like as far as do we upgrade our existing environment or do we build new? And that's going to come into a couple things. Kind of start at the bottom here. Was what is your time frame, right? Upgrading in place could be a short term fix that if you have to get to Windows 11 for some workloads or some use cases quickly, but you still want to look at long term as possibly, you know, deploying new VMs and migrating users over to them, because as you go through that, that's where you look at, the application landscape, right? Do my applications support upgrading to Windows 11? Are they Windows 11 compatible? Do I have any homegrown or custom applications as well? And a lot of times from my consulting past and even now, talking with customers, sometimes there's applications that they haven't maintained or the talent that built those has left and they can't touch those applications. And then the build process too. Now's a good time, or it's been a good time as you look at upgrading or building new, especially when you look at building new and migrating users over to that. As far as look at our tooling, right? What kind of process do we have in place to build it? Are we using automation? Are we using any kind of tools for this? Is it time to look at automation? Is it time to look at new tooling? Also, too, what are our application install processes? Do we have any kind of tooling around that as well?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about a prime time to start to look through this, it's when you have a platform update like an OS upgrade. Um, you know, Lots of organizations have had, we had the pandemic, we had the Great Resignation. So we had a lot of, historical knowledge that left a lot of companies. So you don't necessarily know how it got there. And you want to have something that is automatic and it's repeatable. Because too, how many people really like sitting there and installing applications and installing Windows updates? Whereas if you could have a process that automates that, and then two, we can pull that application and separate that from the underlying platform, whether it's a virtualized or a physical Windows 11, then again, we have more options available to us if our use cases change. If our users say we had a user that had a physical laptop before and now that makes sense for them to have a virtual or vice versa, if we don't have that application tied to the platform, then we can provide a user experience to where they can make that shift and nothing really changes for them. So as you go through this, this is a perfect time to look through all of those processes and find ways that maybe we can make an investment now that will be a little bit more upfront cost, but over the long term sets us up for success so that the next time the next Windows upgrade comes around, we really don't even have to think about this. It's just updating a process and saying, all right, we were Windows 11 yesterday, and today we're Windows whatever version we're going to come up with next.
And that kind of leads us into, our application compatibility in data, right? So as we're also making this transition, where does that data live? Because user data is a big one. Are we backing up those devices? Are we doing like things like known folder move and putting things in OneDrive? Are we using, like that as far as cloud storage, or do we have local file servers as well? So as you're going through this, looking at that and saying, where is that data stored and how can we help kind of get control of that data and making sure that we're not losing anything if it's local on the device and not accounting for it. And then back to again, do we have that talent in house, or do we know through like documentation or any kind of procedures as far as if we have those custom homegrown apps, and can we, put those on devices that we have to roll out new? And then back to again, readiness, right? Do we support Windows 11? Are my applications ready? So all these things kind of come into play. Application data compatibility are big things, because it's not just like Benjamin said before, the Windows OS shell. That's the easy part, but all the stuff that needs to go on that to make our users have good productivity and be able to do their jobs.
Yeah, the apps and data, that's honestly what the end users are caring about. How do I do my job? What is it that I'm using, and what is the data that I'm working on? And making sure that we can provide it to them in an efficiently managed way, so that they have access and they have the user experience and the performance that they want, and we have a way of maintaining that data, securing it, managing it, making sure that we have controls and compliance put around that as well.
And then what about performance, right? So what's my impact as I'm going from Windows 10 to Windows 11? So obviously, because of the added security features, Windows 11 is going to use more CPU. And this is some of the data that we do within our team at Nutanix, is that as things change, new Windows versions, new hardware, new AHV, new AOS, all that kind of stuff, that we test and make sure what's the delta and the difference. Is there anything that we can do on our platform to improve that through software? And then through our NVD, our Nutanix Validated Design, and our reference architecture, we publish out there for customers as well, to kind of see this as kind of like their starting guide for Nutanix when they're virtualizing through their brokers on Nutanix. So, the steady state basically is saying that once we have a full load in the cluster and everyone's logged on and it settled down and we're starting to go through our application workflow, you're seeing about a 10% difference in that steady state between Windows 10 and Windows 11. And also too, just because of the changes, there is a little bit performance as far as like the response time or application launch. And then looking at this is you're thinking about, okay, as we're looking at this and going from Windows 10 to Windows 11, we're going to look at how we're assigning our virtual CPUs or cores to those virtual machines, right? So where you might have been in that 2 to 3 CPU range for Windows 10, you're looking at that 3 to 4 CPU range for Windows 11, and more leaning towards the 4 vCPU side. But the main thing there is making sure that the applications I have on there are multi-threaded applications that can take advantage of the multiple CPU cores on that Windows 11 virtualized instance.
Yeah, and we also have to take into account too some of the new features that are coming out from Microsoft that are just built into the OS, even outside of the applications. I mean, AI and Copilot, every customer I'm talking with is figuring out how is this going to impact the environment? What are they doing with it? So that alone right there is going to add in some performance requirements on top of what you used to have. So keep those things in mind, that even as Jarian said, at a steady state, those are going to still be there and working in the background.
And then what about as I go from, different versions of Windows 11, like 21H2 to 22H2 to 23H2, there is some CPU impact there, along with storage and logon times also. And then depending on the applications, there's also impact there. So as you're going forward in your environment and patching and updating, making sure that you have some kind of test environment too, to make sure you understand what the impact is in your environment as new versions come out, new patches come out as well, to make sure that you're still able to provide your end users with a great end user experience.